Okay, so I received about a dozen requests from different students asking me for my perspective on how to study for an exam. So here it is, here's my video. There's dozens of different videos currently on YouTube providing tips for how to study for an exam. And I have to be honest, a lot of them are quite good. All of the recommendations I've seen currently on YouTube make two overarching assumptions. And well, you know what happens when you assume? You make an ass of both you and me. So don't do that. First, they assume that everybody learns the same way. Now, did they forget grade 6 science class where they learned that people learn in different ways? And the second thing is they assume that the same tactics are applicable across different courses and across different instructors, regardless of the differences across those professors. Not smart either. So in this video, without any assumptions, I'm gonna give you my tips on how to study like a professor. Hey guys, I'm Mike. I'm an organizational behavior professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. In weekly videos, I share my student and professor experiences to help you better manage your university life. I generally don't talk about topics learned in the classroom, but learn the hard way throughout university. So if you are in uni or will be soon, hit subscribe, smash the like, make sure the notification tab is on, and check out my weekly videos. In this week's video, I'll be sharing part 1 of a 2-part series on how to study for an exam. This part will specifically be looking at where you should be focusing your energy when studying, and part 2 will be talking about, once you have all that studying done, how do you ensure that that content actually stays in your brain and you can recall it for the exam. Okay, let's assume for 1 second that you are studying because you want to do well on an exam. Now, I know that I just said that I wouldn't make any assumptions. You make an ass of both you and me. But I want to highlight that the motivations you have for studying influences what you should do. More specifically, you're not just studying, for example, to learn as much content as you can about a particular area. No, you're studying because you want to do well on an exam. Okay, we're on the same page? Good, got it, done. So if you are studying to do well on an exam, to crush an exam, you should not be trying to learn as much as you can about a particular area. No, that's a common misconception about good studying. You shouldn't be trying to cram as much content as you can into your brain because you'll never be able to remember it all for an exam. Instead, you should be studying in a way that matches your learnings about an area with what the professor is going to put on the exam. Because, well, isn't that what a grade consists of? How well the knowledge you know matches up with the questions that are asked on an exam? Yes. So it's not about how much you study and how much you learn about a particular area that matters. It's whether you are studying the right material that's going to be on the exam, which is what really matters for your exam grade. So to explain this more fully, I'm going to highlight 2 considerations you should have before you even start studying for an exam. And that's professor tendencies and learner preferences. So let's first talk about professors and their tendencies that they have during the class that should influence how you study for an exam. Now, I might be a little bit biased, but knowing your professor is super important because how they operate, how they approach their classes, how they approach their learning style is likely to influence the types of questions they put on an exam, which should influence how you study for an exam. Now, there's 2 factors I'm going to be talking about regarding professors. That's dependence on the textbook and their thinking style. Some professors rely on textbooks more than others. And if you have a professor that's dependent on the textbook for teaching materials and teaching in general, you're also likely to have a professor that's dependent on the textbook for creating exam questions. So if you have a professor that's dependent on the textbook, first thing you should do is you should go online and try to source out any exam bank questions you have. So Google course code, Google the title of the textbook, Google the name of the course, and any questions you can find are likely to be similar or the same questions you're going to find on your exam. If you can't find any questions online, don't worry. These types of professors rely on definitions, processes, facts, or specifics found within the textbook. The idea is that these professors try to find specific facts from the textbook and just put them into the exam for you to answer. They want the textbook to objectively say whether an answer is right or wrong. So when it comes to studying for exams from these types of professors, you should be focusing on definitions and concepts, processes that are clearly laid out in the textbook that they're likely to just plop into an exam. And one pro tip is that word for word definitions and concepts and words, word for word, is really important for these professors. I know, it's kind of silly, but it is what it is. Alternatively, if you have a professor that creates their own teaching content, searching out other people's old exam questions is probably not going to be that fruitful for you. In fact, some professors pride themselves on making exam questions that are radically different than other exam style questions. So keep that in mind. You can Google that professor's name, but knowing these types of professors, you're unlikely to find anything online, or the type of exam questions they have in the future are likely to be radically different than they have in the past. So instead, your studying should be based on what they emphasize in the class. Now pay close attention to what content they share in class that differs from the content in the textbook. There's clearly a reason why they're sharing this content. They clearly think it's important, and it's probably going to be on the exam. Another pro tip is if somebody provides multiple examples for a particular topic or provide multiple examples of a particular exam question, then it's a no-brainer. It will be on the exam. As a professor and as a coordinator that oversees multiple professors, I can firmly say that different professors have different tendencies when making an exam. Now, one factor I've been able to identify that influences how professors make exams is whether they are a big picture thinker or a detailed thinker. Big picture thinkers love talking in class about the overarching concept, how things are connected, what are the implications, why a concept matters. They also tend to overlook, ignore, or frankly, they don't think it's relevant, the detailed specifics, numbers, dates in a particular class. I know I'm one of these people, and I frankly don't think that people will ever remember a date after they finish the course, let alone a couple years later. So why would I explain it and emphasize it in the class, right? It doesn't make sense to me because I'm a big picture thinker. Alternatively, detailed thinkers love diving deep into the details. They emphasize specifics, the nuts and bolts of a particular concept, dates, figures, people's names, things of that nature. They assume that once you understand the mechanics of particular steps, that you'll be able to understand a process as a whole. Now, whether you have a professor that's a big picture thinker or a detailed thinker matters, because how the professor thinks is influencing what types of questions are going to be on the exam, which should influence how you study for that particular exam. So, cutting to the chase. If you have a big picture thinker, your studying should be emphasizing concepts, overarching processes, topics that straddle multiple lectures, straddle multiple chapters, because this is what's important for these professors. It's important that you understand the basics of a topic and how it relates to other chapters and how it relates to other courses. Now, a pro tip here is you should be putting extra emphasis when you're studying into the first few slides when a professor introduces a topic. Typically, this is where professors introduce a topic, they explain why it matters, why it's important, and how it connects to other chapters. Really high-level stuff, and I guarantee you that it's going to appear on the exam. So study that and put extra emphasis towards that. Alternatively, if you have a detailed thinker, your studying should be based on specifics, dates, steps in a particular process, people's names, figures, any hard facts you can find in the textbook, because this is what the professor is likely to include on the in the exam. And a pro tip here is to put extra emphasis when you're studying to the slides that are in the middle or towards the end of a particular lecture. These professors, again, they want you to understand the mechanics of specific steps rather than the process as a whole. They assume that if you understand the mechanics of each step, it's going to be easier for you to understand the process as a whole. It does for them, so they'll assume the same for you. That's called projection. Okay, so that was the professor, now it's your turn. The people sitting around you in class are likely learning in a different way. So that only makes sense that you should be studying in a different way than those people as well. So my big recommendation for you is to reflect on whether you're a big picture thinker or a detailed thinker, just like we were talking about the professor, but it matters for you as well. So big picture thinkers tend to have an easier time grasping a concept when they're framed from a global state, but might struggle a little bit when it comes to memorizing the details of a particular concept. Alternatively, detailed thinkers love and are really good at memorizing the details and understanding how the specifics of a concept operate, but really struggle to see how things come together. So let's cut to the chase. If you're a big picture thinker, the first thing you should be doing is focusing on your studies on the big picture, overarching global topics that are taught in the class, but put a time limit on it so you don't spend too much time on it. You will naturally have an affinity towards wanting to study and wanting to think about these big overarching topics. So the first thing you should be doing is satisfying those urges before moving on to the details. Because if you don't satisfy those urges, in the back of your mind, you're gonna always have this distraction. You're gonna be like, I wanna think about the global picture. I wanna think about the global picture. So satisfy that first, study that first, put it in your head, you got it, done, move on to the details. Detailed thinkers, the first thing you should guys be doing is focusing on the details and specifics from the class that were emphasized by your professor, okay? And then after you get a good understanding of the specifics, you should be working towards pressing those together to understanding the overarching picture. You'll be much better suited to understanding the overarching picture once you understand the specifics that are available within a particular concept. So in other words, you can kind of think of it like a puzzle. Once you identify all the puzzle pieces, it'll be easier for you to form that big picture puzzle as a whole. All right, guys, that's it. That is my part 1 for tips on how to study like a professor. If you found these tips helpful or want to learn other tips on how to manage your student life, hit subscribe, smash the like, check the notification tab, and then check out my videos next week. As I mentioned, this is part 1. Part 2 is taking place next week, and I'm going to be providing more tips on how to study. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about how to increase your memory, how to remember things taught in class, and how to recall them during an exam. So stay tuned for next week.